I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And as I am each week, joined now by San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala. Now, Elizabeth, we have some quick updates on previous cases that we have mentioned a couple different times here on the show, followed by a more in-depth discussion of a previously undiscussed issue that grabbed headlines last week involving a judge. So a really important story. But first, let's discuss the guilty verdict for Deandre Dorch.
Yes, it's good to be back, Chance. Deandre Dorch, his trial began last Monday, and 2 days later, on Wednesday, he was found guilty of 2 counts of injury to a child, serious bodily injury by omission, and 2 counts of child abandonment. And just to recap, for everybody who's listening out there, this was a really horrific case from 2016 where there were several children that were found without adult supervision. There were 6 inside a house that didn't have any furniture, and they had been in there in some pretty dire situation, in a living condition, rather. And then there were 2 children who were tied up like dogs outside with chains and with leashes and tethered to the ground. And they had been left out for a very long time. This case was covered by all of San Antonio media when it happened because it was so horrible. It happened during April, and it's in Texas. It's it can be very cold still, and also hot. It is Texas, but it can still be very cold. And that particular week, now this is something that I've never actually seen in a criminal trial before. We actually heard from the chief meteorologist from the Fox News channel, who came to testify about how the particular there was a time in April of that year where we had been having a lot of rain, and I believe actually the week that these children were found tied up in the backyard, there had actually been some hail that was reported in the area. So we really, it was interesting to kind of see, the way evidence was presented in this case, and to see a meteorologist talk about the weather was something else. But the testimony, you could only imagine was it hit you right in the heart, because these were, there was a boy who was 4 and a girl who was 3. And, we were able to see photographs of, them, because the deputies, the Bexar County Sheriff's deputies who responded, and I've never seen this before either. There were 3 sheriff's deputies who testified, and they just broke down and cried on the witness stand when they had discovered these children. And it was just probably the most emotional thing that I've seen in a while. The jury was riveted. It was a jury that had, there were only 2 men on the jury, so you can imagine 10 women and 2 men. It was just a very emotional thing for the jurors to see these first responders talking about these children. And one in particular, this one deputy, talked about how when he set the 3-year-old girl free, she just latched onto him and would not let go, and she buried her face in his chest. And gosh, just talking about it now, I just kind of tear up, because kids just they're not they are not keen on going with strangers, and that was one thing that deputy had testified about. But I will say that Deandre Dorch, he was somewhat emotional during the 3-day trial, and there were at times that he teared up, and when the guilty verdict was read, he was definitely crying, and it was emotional for him, and he was also angry, so angry, in fact, that as he was led away from the courtroom, he used his middle finger to throw an obscene gesture to members of the press, and told us that he did not do it. And but the thing about it is that testimony came out in the trial that he worked all the time, and he was a bartender, so he worked at night. But the injury to a child, serious bodily injury by omission, basically is that, as was argued by the state, that he knew that there was abuse going on by his girlfriend, Portia Phillips, who initially in this particular incident, she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. So the state alleged that he knew that these children were getting beaten, and they were not even their kids. They were taking care of these children that belonged to a woman by the name of Cheryl Reed, who is awaiting trial and is charged with injury to a child, serious bodily injury, and also abandonment because these children were left alone. So Deandre Dorch will be sentenced at a later date because he chose to be sentenced by the judge, and that will be Judge Laura Parker. And because he has a previous record and is considered a habitual offender, the bottom range of his punishment is 25 years. So he faces 25 to 99 years or life in prison. So that's what Judge Parker will be deciding at a later date.
Yeah, and we may have an update on this case yet again here in the coming weeks when we perhaps get that news, so stay tuned for that. Another unfortunate case, Elizabeth, that we have talked about before here on the podcast is one that a lot of people, at least of a certain age, will remember, and that's Genene Jones. There was an update this previous week. Tell me about that.
Yes, Genene Jones appeared in court on Wednesday. And just to let our listeners know about this, she was a nurse who worked in the pediatric ward hospital in two hospitals in San Antonio, and also worked for a pediatrician in Kerrville. She was found guilty of murder in the death of a toddler that she injected with muscle relaxers. And this happened in 1984 when she was sentenced to 99 years. But because of change in the law while she was serving her time, she was to be released in March. So our district attorney, Nicholas LaHood, brought 5 more indictments last year against her, and these are also for murder around the same time that Chelsea McClellan died, and that was the infant who died from the overdose of muscle relaxers. Now, Genene Jones is believed to have killed possibly upwards of 40 to 60 children. It's, no one really knows because she was only convicted of one. And but there were several children who died around the time that she was working in these hospitals and for this pediatrician. So when one of the reasons that Nico LaHood wanted to go back and look at some of these deaths that occurred during the 80s was because he knew that she was going to be released because of this new law. She ended up serving about, I believe, 34 years in prison. But she was set to be released, and with these new indictments, she was moved from her, from Gatesville in the women's unit to San Antonio and is currently in the Bexar County Jail. Now, when she appeared in court on Wednesday, she appeared this time with the assistance of a walker instead of a wheelchair, and without a surgical mask on her face, which is how she appeared in December when she was arraigned on the 5 new murder charges. What her attorney, Cornelius Cox, was asking for was he filed a motion for speedy trial and an assertion of violation of due process, which, I'm not a lawyer, and I had to really ask a lot of questions about this, and he explained it to me this way. He said that those two things are kind of the same thing. This lawyer was making the point that Bexar County had about 34 years to bring more indictments, but didn't while she was incarcerated. So he feels that her due process was violated in addition to the right to speedy trial, as per, her Sixth Amendment right, I believe it is. So the judge denied the motion for speedy trial, and he's actually expected to rule today. So, we will, certainly talk about this again if these 5 new murder indictments against Genene Jones are dismissed. That will cause, all kinds of ripples everywhere because, currently, in court, each time she's appeared, the parents of these 5 children, these additional children who are believed to have been killed by her, appear in court, and they also appear with the support of little Chelsea McClellan's mother, Petty McClellan Weezy, who has it has been showing support and is serving, I guess, somewhat as a guide for these women who are now starting to have to relive the process of losing their children as these cases come up. So stay tuned on that one because a lot of people are going to be watching this. People who are just now learning about the angel of death, or the killer nurse, as she was dubbed during the 80s. And, there's a lot of us that I was actually a college student at the time and was reading about that when I was away. And then there's a lot of people here that have, followed the case through the years. It made national news. It was worldwide. It was just a horrible thing because who thinks about a nurse who was working in a pediatric ward with babies that something like this would happen. So we'll have to stay tuned on that one to see what Judge Frank Castro is going to do today on whether or not these cases will go forward, and if they do, Genene Jones will be in court in July.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. We have some more time left, Elizabeth. Let's get to something new that we haven't discussed before here on our podcast, The Docket. A local judge has been admonished for something that you wouldn't think would happen. Maybe in today's world, especially with some of the tweeting you see by politicians, notably President Donald Trump, it's not so shocking. But usually judges don't engage in this type of behavior. So tell me about this judge and why she's making headlines.
Yes, Chance. This is probate judge Kelly Cross. And last week, the State Commission on Judicial Conduct admonished her and issued sanctions for, among other things, referring to a man disabled, who was disabled and who had infected wounds as, quote, maggot man, and comparing a child's IQ to that of a ballpoint pen. Those are just a couple of things, real quick, that I wanted to point out before I want to kind of go through a little bit about this because it's not very often that this particular thing happens, and I actually have only met Judge Cross once, and I've never, since she is a probate judge. Now probate, they handle people's wills, they do guardianships, some handle mental health, cases and that sort of thing. So it's not really something that I see a whole lot of unless it is a large case. But to have something come down from the State Commission on Judicial Conduct is not something that one sees very often. This public admonition came from them, and they also instructed her to obtain an hour of instruction from a mentor, focusing on judicial demeanor and courtroom decorum. So I'm going to kind of, talk a little bit from the actual report from the commission itself. This particular well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about Judge Cross. She's a first-term Republican. She won her March primary race with 64% of the vote, and she is going to face attorney Oscar Kazin, who's a Democrat, in the November general election. So, this is they issued a 5-page ruling, the commission, that says it received anonymous complaint in 2016 and accused Judge Cross of referring to a proposed ward as Mr. Maggot or Maggot Man. And this was during a proceeding in his guardianship case. There apparently were written statements to confirm this account that were provided by 3 witnesses. And Judge Cross told the commission that she had no recollection of those statements, but she also said she did not doubt their veracity because her defense on this is that these offhanded remarks are a way to distinguish litigants among thousands that come before judges. I mean, judges do see a lot of people. I mean, I can't even imagine what, a court like probate, where, because you've got wills, you have all of these different things. I mean, when I pass those courts on my way into the office in the Bexar County Courthouse, the hallways are just packed with people, waiting to get into one of 2 probate courts that we have. So, they do see a lot of people, but this, when you get into name calling, that's something else. So the response that she gave to the commission when she testified was that attorneys and other people talk to her about cases every day. And I believe her quote was, I'll just read a quote to you, that she says, "They use the proper name, but I can't remember 4,000 names. To differentiate one case from another, I might ask, is this the Maggot guy? Is this the Rat Lady case? The surnames don't stick." So she did also tell the commission that she only used such language in front of attorneys and other professionals appearing in her court, and not in front of the person being discussed. But witnesses and others that are familiar with her actually told my colleague Bruce Selcraig, who wrote the story last week, that this isn't true. That Judge Cross is she is outspoken. There was a litigant also that presented a statement to the commission as well, who called Judge Cross rude and curt, and said that she, quote, lacked compassion for my family and other families. So, this seems that it was something that had been building for a while in her court, according to this 5-page document. There have been reports that Judge Cross yells at attorneys in front of their clients, and the name calling. It was just something that I guess it came to a head, and so when these reports are made to the Judicial Commission, they look at it, and I mean, just in looking at their website, there are, it handles the entire state of Texas, and there's a lot of judges, and but when you look at when they actually release, they have these pages where you can go and you can look at their admonitions and the public statements that they have. They have some, they do take some actions privately as well, but on the public ones, at least, it seems like it's a pretty big deal. So so that was something that Judge Cross said in a statement that she released, that she felt that this was politically motivated. Again, there is an election that's going to be coming up. But it's in her written statement, actually, she said that she appreciated the commission's measured response to what she said she believed were politically motivated allegations against her. And she called it, she said, quote, "At times my zealous commitment may have exceeded my skills at diplomacy." So this is a statement that she released on Friday. And so moving forward with what the commission has asked for her to do, it seems that she is going to have to meet with someone to just kind of, talk, about her behavior and I guess other things to kind of change this particular pattern that seems to be appearing in her courtroom. So that's something that I have not seen in my time covering the courthouse, and we'll see what happens moving forward on this case.
Yeah, Elizabeth, 3 different cases that we've touched on today that likely will probably appear again here on the docket with some updates. So thank you, as always, for bringing our attention to 2 updates on previous cases we've discussed. And as we just mentioned here, something new that will probably have an update later on down the road. And of course, this is Fiesta Week, so have a good rest of Fiesta Week, and we'll catch up with you after all of this is over at the beginning of next week.
Yes, thanks so much, Chance, for the opportunity.
And a big thanks to San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.